B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Monday, January 22nd, 2018. Wow, that was a quickie. Yes, 60 hours was the length of time before Democrats caved and ended the government shutdown that was primarily prompted by the Republicans' refusal to honor their promises to deal with the Dreamers and pass a new DACA bill. And it is sad to see that the moderate Democrats who fear their voters on Election Day in the primary and then in November this year, they got scared. And it appears that Trump and the Republicans were unified in refusing to negotiate on any of the issues, including the Dreamers, until the shutdown was ended. And it appears that Mitch McConnell and his uneasy alliance with Donald Trump prevailed over the Democratic weakness. And you don't have to just take my word for it. The headlines at the Washington Post, Democrats caved on the shutdown, and they're admitting it. Vice News, Senate Democrats cave on DACA and vote to reopen the government. And I do understand that these leaders are skittish about being fingered, being targeted, being blamed as the cause of the shutdown. And you saw the dueling hashtags, the Trump shutdown, the Schumer shutdown. And a lot of that is pretty trivial. It's the kind of posturing and gamesmanship that is endemic to the process inside the Beltway. And the Democrats believe that they extracted promises from the Republican leader McConnell. He assured them that the Senate would vote on some kind of immigration deal by February 8th, and if they didn't have a deal, there would be an up or down vote on DACA. And in exchange, the Democrats agreed to a 3-week continuing resolution on the budget, which was the trigger to technically shut down the government. And once again, the Dreamers are held hostage, and their fate drags on into February. And all indications are that the Republicans will give them relief. But at what price? Because this was the leverage the Democrats had to get what they call a clean bill, DACA only. But by giving the Republicans a 3-week delay, and, of course, signaling that they're afraid to shut down the government and that they will blink again if they are forced to the brink by the Republicans, the Democrats have significantly weakened their hand. And the Dreamers, the DACA legislation, will be part of a bigger package that will presumably include money for Trump's southern border wall, because Chuck Schumer coughed that up as a possibility in the last-ditch attempt to avoid the shutdown in his meeting with Trump on Friday noontime. And all of this is further complicated for members of both parties by Trump. Now, he was shamed into remaining in Washington. He didn't go to Mar-a-Lago in Florida to host the big fundraiser and celebration for his first year in office. That said, the reports are that he was not really directly involved in any of the back and forth. John Kelly, his chief of staff, and Stephen Miller, the hard right hater who is the real driver of the extreme immigration posture of the White House. And every time Trump tries to make a deal with a Democrat, he's got Stephen Miller saying, oh, no, you can't do that. You promised your base that you would, promote strife and hate, stoke the anger that some Americans feel. And so even Lindsey Graham said of Trump, his heart is right on this issue. I think he's got a good understanding of what will sell, and every time we have a proposal, it is only yanked back by staff members. As long as Stephen Miller, Graham said, is in charge of negotiating immigration, we are going nowhere. He's been an outlier for years. And you probably know he came off of Jeff Sessions' Senate staff, and he has long been on Capitol Hill promoting very divisive immigration policies and this white nationalist point of view. Now, immigration was one of many issues that were the subject of the protest marches by women that took place Saturday all across the country. And I fully support these women's marches. I think there is a unifying factor. I think that it helps bring many women, and young women in particular, into political activism. So on that level, I'm a complete supporter. But the lack of a specific focus, there isn't a set of demands or a contract with America or a manifesto. And part of that is strategic. They're afraid if it is singularly focused, on impeachment or on abortion rights or on other issues that women champion, that fewer women will participate because, well, they have a reason to disagree with. But I think that the women in the pink pussy hats do need to at least form offshoot organizations that focus on specific issues and specific demands. And there were a lot of Me Too signs. There were some class-based messages. And this is a great exercise of the First Amendment. But, for example, the Democratic leadership that pays lip service to the resistance, that will accept the support of these women and then try to kind of manipulate it or force it into a certain pigeonhole, well, they're the ones who really need to be protested. And Democratic leaders, almost to a person, refuse to embrace a call for impeachment. And they stoke the Russiagate scandal, and they never answer the question, okay, Bob Mueller finds collusion, Bob Mueller finds criminal behavior. What happens then? Well, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives can receive his report and do nothing about it. I mean, they could even hold a vote on an impeachment resolution and vote it down. And so Tom Steyer, who is the environmentalist, former hedge fund operator, he's got a couple of $1 billion of his own money, and he has been liberally spending it this year on messages supporting impeachment. And his group, called Need to Impeach, has called for 500 communities across the nation to host house parties on the weekend. Actually, the day is February 17th. That's the weekend before President's Day, to build more momentum and to put pressure on the Democratic leaders. Because the only way impeachment is going to develop is if the minority party galvanizes public opinion and scares the shit out of Republicans, particularly House members who are up for re-election this year, and makes them choose. Do you want to continue to support Trump at the risk of your own re-election prospects? That is the only language they understand. And that is the only way forward. And Steyer's group points out that 51 constitutional law scholars already say Trump has committed at least 8 impeachable offenses. We don't need Mueller. We don't need Russia collusion. We don't need Russia hack the DNC to proceed with impeachment of Trump. But I believe that many activists are buffaloed about this. And there are many people who think that impeachment is right around the corner. It's just somehow going to magically happen. And I have sorry news for you. It doesn't really work that way. Now, one of the other messages front and center at the Women's March was the Me Too movement. And I think that that kind of solidarity is very significant. And it was on display last night in the SAG Awards. And as a longtime member of AFTRA, which merged with SAG 8 or 10 years ago, I watched with interest. And I have to tell you, I was offended. Now, I understand that in order to put a spotlight on women and to give them greater coverage, that you can't have as many men participate in the award show. I get that. There is a finite number of presenters and other positions on the show. But leading men, top actors, males, were consigned to the role of extras, seated in the audience. Yes, when a male won an award, he was permitted to go to the podium and accept it. And I believe I saw one African-American co-presenter, a male, of an award. But otherwise, it was all females. And it kind of reminded me of The View, like this was the View Awards. And I'm uncomfortable with that, because not every male in Hollywood is a sex offender. Not every male in America deserves to be included with name your predator, whether it's Harvey Weinstein or Woody Allen or Bill Cosby or any of the others who have been proven to be predators, not just harassers. And so I was disappointed. And there were some key moments when Roseanne Arquette was up there with Marissa Tomei. And Rosanna Arquette deserves credit for being one of the leaders in taking some risk in exposing her story about Harvey Weinstein. And so I think that this is an indication that we have gone too far. And I know as a male that there are many people who will either denounce me or just say, you're mansplaining, you don't know what you're talking about. And you know what? Men have a right to an opinion on these issues. We have not lost our right because of predators like Harvey Weinstein and others. Now, to the films, I thought as I reviewed many of the films, and I got a vote in the SAG Awards, Frances McDormand won Best Actress, and Allison Janney was also nominated. And there was one other female whose name I can't remember, but she's the mom in Lady Bird. And to me, these nominees represented kind of the theme of the year. It was mean moms. I mean, Frances McDormand is this tough broad who takes the billboards out in Ebbing, Missouri, because her daughter had been raped and killed and the cops had not found a suspect. And then Allison Janney did an excellent job playing Tanya Harding's white trash mom. And again, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the woman in Lady Bird, who was also very tough on her daughter. Every day I pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. And if you're inclined to take out a new subscription, go ahead and pause the podcast right here. Pop on over to peterbcollins.com. Find the menu tab, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page. And you can join stalwart supporters like Arlene Montemarano, Stuart Russell. They kick in $10 every month. Brian Mazzi and Benny Alto. Well, they put in $5 a month. Of course, in Benny's case, he's got a $5 subscription for each one of his 3 dogs. I think that's a lovely touch. So whatever fits your budget. Some people just want to make a one-time contribution, and you can do that via PayPal on my website or just by putting a stamp on an envelope and putting something in it. My address to mail something to is P.O. Box 150-660, San Rafael, California, zip code 94915. That's Box 150660, San Rafael, and the zip is 94915. Now, the latest hypocrite outed in the nation's capital is a Republican from Pennsylvania who has been very active in posturing as pro-woman and tough on harassment and sexual abuse. He is Patrick Mian, Republican, and he's been serving on the House Ethics Committee, but he was bounced over the weekend after it was revealed that he settled with a woman who had worked in his office, much younger than him. She was decades younger, regarded Mian as a father figure, But after that woman became involved in a serious relationship with someone outside the office last year, Mian professed his romantic desires, first in person, then in a handwritten letter, and he grew hostile when she did not reciprocate. So a settlement ensued. Taxpayer dollars were involved. Paul Ryan, the Speaker, dumped him from the Ethics Committee and said that Mian should repay the taxpayer funds. And so currently we have, I believe, 2 Democrats who have resigned and 2 Republicans who have promised not to run for re-election. We'll see which door Mr. Mian chooses to use to exit the Capitol and his self-created problems. And it's interesting to see the coverage in the New York Times was much more complete in reporting the allegations. And The Guardian from London, which often offers a good offshore view of American issues and news, they were remarkably taking the congressman's denials and not countering them or balancing them with the accusations. I found that curious. Whoops. They lost some data. Yes, there are twin stories coming out of the Beltway right now. Over at the NSA in Fort Meade, Maryland, they're saying, whoops, you know that data that we told the judge that we would preserve because of these lawsuits that challenged the unconstitutional, illegal surveillance of Americans for years? Yeah, we were cleaning up our servers and we needed some space for some new illegal data that was coming in the pipeline. And so you understand, we purged it, right? Well, the NSA told U.S. District Judge Jeffrey White last Thursday night that the agency did not preserve the content of Internet communications intercepted between 2001 and 2007 under the original secret and illegal Bush program. And there are many lawsuits based on that. And they're going to say, whoops, you can't sue, you don't have standing because you can't prove you were part of the group surveilled. And over at the FBI, you know about these troublesome text messages between a couple of illicit lovers. That's Lisa Page, a lawyer, and Peter Strzok, an investigator. Strzok served on the Hillary Clinton email investigation, and then he also was put on the Trump campaign investigation sometime around July of last year. At any rate, a bunch of their text messages cannot be found. They have lost about 5 months' worth of text messages between the two staffers. And this was exposed by the chair of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, Ron Johnson, the Republican from Wisconsin. And over at Consortium News, Ray McGovern, the longtime CIA analyst and a man who I have deep respect for, gives a little history about intelligence agency failures, errors, and the fact that there's never been any penalty to those who committed them. And he says it's a 70-year-old tradition. Today's lack of accountability is enabled by corruption at the top of intelligence agencies, the convenient secrecy behind which their leaders hide, bureaucratic indignities and structural flaws in the system, the indulgence and complicity of most of the mainstream media, and the eunuchs leading the congressional oversight committees, who history shows can be bullied by threats, including blackmail like J. Edgar Hoover performed. And he targets Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader and former member of the Intelligence Committee. She co-chaired it or chaired it for a while. And he says that she used to boast about her longtime tenure at Intelligence, only to complain later that they misled us all the time. And he notes going back to the Nixon era, and I remember this, Ray, when Rosemary Woods accidentally caused an 18-and-a-half-minute gap in one of the Nixon tapes from the Oval Office. Then there's Jose Rodriguez, who worked at the CIA, ordered the destruction of videotapes of torture scenes. And he was rewarded by a book contract where he was allowed to tell stories without the typical redaction that's imposed by the agency on whistleblowers. I've linked to Ray's piece so you can read it when you have a moment. I'm also linking to a great bit of a long read coming from New York Magazine, and will credit the byline Simon Van Zuylen Wood. He went to Rio de Janeiro to shadow Glenn Greenwald for a few days, and while this headline is a little annoying, does this man know more than Robert Mueller? Subhead, Glenn Greenwald's War on the Russia Investigation. It's a pretty fair recap of Greenwald's courageous coverage and strong skeptical analysis of this runaway freight train. The article reads that for the better part of 2 years, Greenwald has resisted the nagging bipartisan suspicion that Trump world is one way or another compromised by a meddling foreign power. If there's a conspiracy, he suspects, it's one against the president. Where others see collusion, he sees McCarthyism. Greenwald is predisposed to righteous posturing and contrarian eye-poking, and reflexively more skeptical of the U.S. intelligence community than of those it tells us to see as enemies. That's a convoluted sentence. And even if claims, it continues, about Russian meddling are corroborated by Mueller's investigation, Greenwald's not sure it adds up to much. Some hacked emails changing hands, none all that damaging in their content, maybe some malevolent Twitter bots. In his eyes, the Russia-Trump story is a shiny red herring, one that distracts from the failures, corruption, and malice of the very establishment so invested in promoting it. And when in January, as journalism Twitter was chastising the president for one outrage or another, Congress quietly passed a bipartisan bill to reauthorize sweeping NSA surveillance. You had to admit Greenwald might be onto something. Now, this article doesn't mention the Intercept's recent kind of confusing tilt in favor of Trump-Russia, except for Greenwald, and the writing of the former celebrated New York Times reporter James Risen, now at the Internet. But let me quote a little further here from this New York Mag story. This is a year in which even the most anti-establishment liberals have found themselves rooting for Mueller, a Republican who ran George W. Bush's War on Terror FBI. It is not an insubstantial portion of Democratic online loyalists who believe that if you deviate from Democratic Party orthodoxy on the Trump-Russia question, you are a paid Kremlin agent, Greenwald says. And many of those who don't believe Greenwald works for Vladimir Putin tend to think he does his bidding for free. Says former Gawker editor John Cook, who worked with Greenwald at The Intercept, I love him, but he's dead tragically wrong on this. And one more quote, Greenwald has been excommunicated from the liberal salons that celebrated him in the Snowden era. Anybody who questions the Russia consensus, he says, becomes a blasphemer, becomes a heretic. I think that's what they see me as. Greenwald is no longer invited on MSNBC, and he's portrayed in the Twitter fever swamp as a leading villain of the self-styled resistance. I used to be really good friends with Rachel Maddow, he says, and I've seen her devolution from this really interesting, really smart independent thinker into this utterly scripted, intellectually dishonest, partisan hack. Amen, Glenn. Amen. Carol Rosenberg in the Miami Herald continues to provide the best American coverage of Guantanamo. And over the last few days, there have been legal squabbles in the courtroom where the alleged masterminds of 9/11 are being tried. And the chief prosecutor, Brigadier General Mark Martins, is really contentious. And the issue is, can the defense use testimony and evidence related to the torture and to the gruesome detention of these individuals before they were shipped to Guantanamo in the trial? And the government prosecutors say, oh, no, that's all off limits. It's secret. It would compromise sources and methods. Now, all these black sites are closed, and we're told that we don't torture people anymore. So what secrets would be endangered by allowing the defense to put on an adequate defense for these defendants who are treated as notorious criminals by the U.S. media? One case of alleged domestic terror support has come to a close as a Columbus, Ohio man, aged 26, Abdurrahman Sheikh Mohammed, was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison. He pleaded guilty to providing material support to terrorists, giving a false statement involving international terrorism in August of 2015. He admitted traveling in 2014 to Syria in an attempt to join his brother, a fighter with the al-Nusra Front terrorist group, and give him money and communications devices. Now, he did make the trip, but his brother was killed, and there's no evidence that they ever made contact when the younger brother was in Syria. Now, court documents show that Mohammed and 3 other men went to a shooting range in Ohio, but his defense attorney said that Mohammed had completely abandoned any plans for terrorism. So I don't know enough about this case to offer any sharp criticism, but I am troubled because we don't have a declared war against al-Nusra. Sure, they're on a list as an alleged sponsor of terrorism, but there are plenty of groups like that. And I don't know that there is a specific law that prevents an American from saying, hey, I want to support this group in a proxy war in Syria. I find that legally very, very weak. Now, in that region, Mike Pence, the vice president, has been busy alienating some allies. He went to Jordan, where the King Abdullah, reminded him that Jordan has a special role in the guardianship of the Muslim sites in Jerusalem, and therefore he has a deeper objection than just politics to Trump's announcement to move the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And when Trump went to the Knesset in Israel and gave a speech celebrating this plan to move the embassy, there was a protest staged by the Palestinians who were elected to the Knesset. And they held up signs with the slogan, "Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine." Now, the security guards there at the Knesset grabbed the 13 Palestinian members of parliament and ejected them. And Pence continued his speech, which drew jeers even from Zionist supporters in Israel for its excessive quote of the Christian Bible. And we know that Pence is a guy who thinks that the end times will happen in the Middle East and that leads to Judgment Day, and he's waiting for the rapture. And one Israeli observer tweeted, where is it here? Don't leave out the part about the rapture, Mike. and get this, even Andrea Mitchell, who is a veteran corporate journalist and works for NBC, she sent out a tweet saying that this is out of tune with Israel's boast about being the region's only true democracy. Can you imagine, she tweeted, Capitol Police dragging members of the Congressional Black Caucus off the House floor? And the other problem in the Middle East is that Trump insists on continuing to arm Kurdish groups in Syria. He says to prevent a resurgence of the Islamic State. But Turkey is deeply offended, and they have launched military action along their border with Syria. It is a brand new war in the region, and it threatens to compromise a number of U.S. alliances and lead to who knows what. The Supreme Court of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania ruled today that the boundaries of the state's 18 congressional districts are so seriously gerrymandered that they violate the state constitution, and they ordered new maps to be drawn. They gave the Republican-controlled legislature until February 9th to come up with a new map. Otherwise, they said they'll create their own map for congressional districts in Pennsylvania. Bob Menendez, the allegedly corrupt senator, Democrat from New Jersey, I believe he's corrupt, he beat the rap on a trial that ended in a hung jury a couple of months ago. Federal prosecutors have announced that he will face a new trial sometime later this year as he stands for re-election in New Jersey. Pope Francis is trying to pull his foot out of his mouth with, those papal slippers on it. When he was in Chile a couple of days ago, He made some really strong remarks condemning people who have protested his choice of a bishop in Chile who is accused of covering up for a pedophile priest. The Chilean bishop is Juan Barros, and the Pope says he is innocent and that nobody's brought him any proof. But one of his underlings, Cardinal Sean O'Malley, the Archbishop of Boston and the Pope's top advisor on clerical sex abuse, he had to kind of play the role of, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, where he went public saying, the Pope misspoke. He didn't quite say that, but he undermined the Pope's comments. Well, Francis has now apologized, but he still maintains that his pal is innocent. And this is, I think, a serious flaw in Francis's papacy. And finally today, the coroner in Los Angeles has released his report on the October sudden death of rock star Tom Petty. Jonathan Lucas, the coroner, said that Petty's system showed traces of fentanyl, oxycodone, temazepam, alprazolam, citalopram, and other strains of fentanyl. And we know that he was being treated for some serious pain issues. His wife, Dana, issued a statement on Facebook, and I commend her for confronting this. She said that Petty suffered from many serious ailments, including emphysema, knee problems, and, most significantly, a fractured hip. And he had been on tour this fall, and his hip had basically just dissolved. And the pain was described as unbearable, and they speculate that was the cause of his overuse of medication. As a family, they said, we recognize this report may spark a further discussion on the opioid crisis, and we feel that it is a healthy and necessary discussion. I'm glad they didn't try to keep this secret, because we need to face these issues head on. And we need accountability for the corporate drug pushers who addicted millions of Americans to these painkillers. I'm Peter B. Collins. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.